Hello, and welcome to this presentation of Caring for Your Family Photographs, sponsored by the City of Clearwater's Aging Well Center. In this presentation, we'll look at identifying some of the common dangers that could damage your family photographs and tips for handling and storing your family photos. There'll only be time to talk about paper-based photographs, since those are probably the bulk of your family collection. There won't be time to talk about other photograph media, such as cased images like daguerreotypes or tintypes, slides, negatives, etc. Because this is only a short video, and I'm not an expert on photographs, at the end of this presentation, I'll provide lists of additional resources that you can consult, both print and online, to learn much more about how to take care of your family photos. First, let's look at some of the dangers that could damage your photos. First, we'll look at physical dangers, such as mishandling. As you can see from the examples that I show here, both of these photos have sustained damage over time due to mishandling. In the top photo, you might be able to tell that there are a lot of creases and cracks where the photo has obviously been crumpled and bent. And in the lower photo, you can see that over time, the photograph and its backing became brittle, and mishandling has caused portions of it to break away. Another possible danger is improper labeling, and I'll be talking more about that a little bit later in this presentation. There's also the possibility of abrasion. This is scratches on the surface of the photograph. Transference can happen if there is something pressing up against the surface of a photograph, such as the back of another photograph or a sheet in a photo album. This can actually transfer part of the surface of the photograph onto the material that's pressed up against it. And of course, things such as water and fire can cause major damage to a photograph. There are also biological dangers, such as pests, whether they be insects or rodents. Additionally, mold could form on the photograph and cause irreparable damage, particularly if the photo is stored in an environment that's too humid. There's also the possibility of chemical dangers, such as gases that may be given off from materials such as plastics in which the photograph might be stored, or acids from paper in albums or in boxes in which the photo may have been stored. The chemicals and materials used in the photographic process are also often inherently unstable and can break down over time. As you can see from the two examples shown here, both of these photos have badly faded over time. Adhesives can also cause problems. Adhesives can often break down over time and irreparably damage the photo, whether this was from tape or glue used to adhere it in an album or used to try and repair damage to the photograph. You don't want to use any tape or glue near the photo, even on the backing. Cleaning solutions can also cause chemical damage, whether it be from trying to clean something that has gotten on the photo, or even cleaning products that are stored in close proximity to the photos. When you handle a photo, there's the possibility of transferring soaps, oils, and lotions from your hands to the surface of the photo, which again can cause chemical damage, particularly over time. Environmental factors are an important part of long-term storage and preservation for photographs. Although we often cannot create a perfect environment all the time for the storage of our photos, trying to do our best to control the environment of the photos is an important factor in how long they will last. I'll talk a bit more about this later in the presentation, but for now, let me touch on some of the basics. Temperature is important for the storage of a photograph. The experts believe that about 70 degrees Fahrenheit is a good temperature. If it's too warm, this can accelerate the aging process and chemical breakdown of the photographs. Humidity is another important factor. Again, the experts believe that approximately 50% humidity is optimal. If it is too humid, there is an increased risk of condensation forming on the photographs, which can warp and damage the photo and increase the likelihood of mold and mildew. However, if it is too dry, this can cause the photos to become brittle and increase the chance of them breaking over time. Light is another important factor. You don't want to have a photo on display being kept in direct sunlight, and fluorescent lights can also cause damage. You want a display photo to be in an area that's not too bright and does not get direct sunlight. Again, I'll be talking a little bit more about environmental factors a bit later when we talk about storage. When looking for products to use when working with or storing photographs, there are certain terms that you should be on the lookout for. One of the most important is PAT, or Photographic Activity Test. This is an industry standard test used to test products to see if they are safe for photographs. You may also see terms such as photo safe or acid free. Acid free is important if you're looking for a product that is paper-based. You also should look to see if it is determined to be lignin-free. Lignin is a chemical compound found in plants, so this would be associated with wood or wood pulp that has been used to make paper or other products. If you've seen old newspapers, you know that they quite often become yellowed and brittle over time. This is because they're often high in both lignin and acid, and this can break down over time. When dealing with plastics, you want to make sure that it is a non-PVC plastic or polyvinyl chloride. This is what you don't want to use. Instead, use ones such as polyester, commonly referred to as mylar plastic, or polypropylene. Another common plastic is polyethylene, but I've seen different sources which disagree on whether that is safe long term for storage. So you might want to use one of the others to be on the safe side. Another term that you'll often see is archival or archival quality. Unfortunately, there is no industry standard for a product using the term archival. So it may or may not truly be safe to use with the photographs. Instead, you want to make sure that some of these other terms are also present, or if possible, contact the manufacturer and see if it has passed the PAT. Handling is another important factor when dealing with your photographs. You want to make sure that you only have clean, dry hands when you handle the photograph. If possible, use cotton gloves. However, the ones that are shown in this photo, you may notice, are actually a little bit too big. Try to find gloves that are better suited to your hands. If they are ill-fitting, you may accidentally drop a photo, or you may try to grip it too hard in order to compensate for the bad fitting gloves. Use both hands in order to make sure that the photo is well supported. And try, if at all possible, to not touch the actual photo surface. The ultimate goal will be to try to minimize the direct handling of the photos themselves. If there is loose dust or dirt on a photo, you can try very gently and carefully brushing it away with a soft, dry brush, such as an art brush that you might find in an arts and crafts store. However, if the material is stuck to the photo, don't try to pry it up. That will likely damage the photo by lifting the surface away with the debris. Do not use any water, chemicals, or cleansers on the photos. This will inevitably damage the photo. And don't try to rub away anything on the surface. This will often lead to abrasions or flaking off of the surface of the photo. It's important to be able to identify the contents of that photo. Because photographs can last for generations, it's important to record all of the information that's known about that photograph so that that information doesn't become lost over time. If you inherit a collection of photos, such as in a box or in a photo album, first try to preserve or at least record the original order of the photos in that collection. This can help identify who it was that gathered that collection, when it occurred, and why it may have been collected in the first place. There can be valuable clues that could lead to new discoveries by being able to identify the order in which that collection was gathered. If you decide to separate the photos, or if you already have a hodgepodge that has been sorted through without any identifiable order, you might want to sort those photos, such as by family, or by time period, or even by size of photo. Labeling is another important factor. Experts differ on whether you should actually physically label the photo itself. Some say that you shouldn't, or at most, maybe just lightly put a number on the back and record the information elsewhere. Others say that it's important to actually label on the back of the photo because any other information, such as on a piece of paper or in an album, may get lost if that photo becomes separated from it. If you do decide to identify the photo directly on it, all the experts agree to not mark the surface of the photo. Instead, always use the back. And if you do, use a soft lead pencil, such as the type that you would get at an arts and crafts supply. You should not use pen or markers. Unfortunately, I wish I had known that in the past, as I willy-nilly went through my own family collection. And as you can see in the example here, I actually used a fine point Sharpie marker in order to mark the back of the photos. This is not the example that you want to follow. You may also choose to label the photo on the outside of whatever storage medium you put the photo in. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. If you have it in an album, make sure that the caption is away from the photo on the album paper or adhered to the album paper rather than on the photo itself. If you choose to put the bulk of the information separate from the photo, one option you might consider is to use a small piece of acid-free photo-safe paper that you record the information and keep with the photo against the back of it. The type of information that you would like to record are things such as the name or names of who's pictured in the photograph, as close as you can get to the date of when the photo was taken, and where the photo was taken, and if there is any special occasion associated with that photo. Some experts also say that it's a good idea to record your name and when you labeled the photo, so that again, that information can help provide clues to future generations who inherit that photograph. If you decide to display the photo, be careful of what materials are used. For example, if you want to frame a photo, make sure that the frame and all of its parts are archival quality and have passed the PAT. They should also include matting. This is to allow a certain degree of airflow between the surface of the photo and the glass or plastic used in the frame. This also prevents the surface of the photo from coming into direct contact with that glass or plastic. Make sure that the room where you display the photo can be controlled regarding light, temperature, and humidity. Many experts suggest using a copy or a duplicate rather than the original photo, so it can be protected. If you use an album, again, make sure that it's archival quality and have passed the PAT. This usually does not include the magnetic albums that use a clean sheet of plastic to hold the photos into place. These were very common in the past and are still available today. They are usually not photo safe, and that plastic will break down and could cause irreparable damage over time. Many experts suggest that if you have one of these old albums, it's probably best to try and remove the photos from them if you can do so safely. In the list of resources that I'll have at the end of this presentation, I include a YouTube video put out by the Smithsonian that talks about how to safely remove photos from this type of album. If you remove photos from an album and put them into a new one, try to keep the original order of the photos if possible, because again, these can have important clues as to who created the album and why. If you have an old album that seems to be safe for the photos, it's probably best to leave the photos in them. If you try to remove them, you may damage them. If you have such an old photo album, you might consider placing sheets of acid-free tissue paper, also called interleave, between the pages to protect the surface of the photos. If you wish to put the photos in a scrapbook, it's usually best to use copies or duplicates and store the original photo so it isn't damaged. When storing photos, you may consider using photo-safe envelopes or sleeves, such as those shown here. This can individually protect the photos. If you have a photo that has the surface starting to flake away, consider using an individual archival quality box as the type shown here in the middle that will individually protect that photo and make sure that nothing's touching the surface. If you have a photo that is breaking, you might consider using archival quality board, such as a type of poster board, that you can lay the photo against in order to support it and keep it from breaking anymore. Storing groups of photos, you can put them into archival quality photo boxes, such as that shown here at the bottom. However, make sure that it is not ordinary cardboard. Cardboard is usually high in lignin and will damage your photos over time. If you store them in a box like this and decide not to use individual sleeves for them, you might consider using sheets of that acid-free interleave or tissue between the photos in order to protect the surface of each of them. Make sure that you do not use paper clips, rubber bands, or anything else like this to hold photos together, as they can cause damage. If you want to put them in a plastic bin, again, make sure that this is a non-PVC type of plastic. They also have photo sheets, such as that shown here on the screen, that allows you to put groups of photos in a binder. If you do, make sure that the binder as well as the sheets are archival quality. Once you have them in a container, whether that be an album or a box or a bin or a binder, you might arrange and organize those containers by grouping them. For example, by person, by family group, by time period, location, or events. It all depends on what you have in your own family collection and what makes sense for you. Make sure that you do not laminate your photos. You may think that this will preserve it long term, but instead, you are likely to cause irreparable damage. The process of laminating generates a lot of heat, which can degrade the photo. And the plastic and adhesive used is generally not photo safe. It will break down over time. And once a photo has been laminated, it's nearly impossible to remove it from that laminate material without damaging it. If you have a particularly fragile photo and you want to put it in a box such as that I'd shown on the previous slide, where it can be individually sized for that photo, you might consider nesting it by first wrapping it carefully in that archival safe tissue or interleave in order to keep that photo from shifting in the box. You might try keeping photos of the same size together. If you have photos of multiple sizes in a photo box or bin, that bin will probably be sized to fit the largest photos, and the smaller ones in between may shift around, which could cause abrasion to the surface. Label the containers on the outside so that as you're organizing them wherever you plan to store them, you can quickly look at the containers and have an idea of what's in them without having to open them up and sift through the photos. You might also consider keeping an inventory list of the photos in each container, such as the type of inventory sheet shown here. This way, later on, when you want to get your hands on one of those photos to look at it again, you can look through the inventory and know exactly where to find it, so that you don't have to open up the different containers and sift through to look for it. Again, you want to try and minimize the amount of handling that you do to the photos in order to keep them preserved. When deciding where to store your photos, it's best to look for a location which has a clean and stable environment. It's best not to put the containers directly on the floor. Otherwise, they're more subject to pests and potential water damage. You also don't want to put the photos in the garage, an attic, or basement, because those areas tend to be more difficult to control when it comes to temperature and humidity. You also don't want to put the container up against an outside wall, because that's more subject to fluctuations in temperature and humidity. You don't want to put it near a vent, a radiator, or a fireplace. It's usually best to look for an inside room or closet. If you have trouble controlling the humidity, you might consider placing a desiccant, such as one shown here, near the containers with the photos in order to help remove the moisture from the air. If you want to make a copy of the photograph, there are several options. In the past, the most common way was to use a photocopying machine. However, nowadays, this is generally not recommended because of the warmth and the bright light that is used in the photocopying process. If you need to photocopy, do so as little as possible. You can also make a copy by taking a photograph of the picture. If you do so, do it without the flash, because that light can affect the original photograph. Nowadays, most copying and digitizing is done using a scanner. It's a good idea to go through your old photographs and create a digital copy to make sure that you always have an image of that photo, just in case something should happen to the original somewhere down the line. When scanning, you may wish to use both a master copy and a working copy if at some point in time you want to manipulate that photo. A master copy would be a digital image that you keep as is long term. Whereas the working copy, you can manipulate in order to make improvements or restorations to it. I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. For file types, usually for the master copy, it's recommended that you use the TIFF file format. This is a very large file format, but it creates a very high resolution image that does not lose any of its quality. And then if you want to make any changes to that photo, make an additional working copy in a JPEG format. When scanning, it's recommended to use 600 dpi or larger file resolution and use it in full color. Sometimes you need to seek help in order to restore or protect a photo. Many of our old photos have faded, changed color, or gotten damaged over time. Nowadays, the restoration process is usually done by making a digital copy and manipulating that image in order to restore it or enhance it, such as the images that I've shown here, where color has been changed. There's software and online resources that allow you to do this at home. However, if you want it to be done professionally, there are resources available. To make sure that you have somebody who is trained to do this properly, you might also consider consulting the website for the Professional Photographers of America to get recommendations. If the photo has become damaged and you feel that it is valuable enough to warrant the cost of physical restoration and conservation, consult the American Institute for Conservation's website. They have a free online referral system to show you conservators that are in your area. Don't try to repair the photo yourself. Without the proper training, you could just make things much worse. As genealogist Maureen Taylor, otherwise known as the photo detective, states, never do anything to a picture that cannot be undone. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, because this is such a short video, I only had time to touch on some of the basics. You should also consult other resources, such as the books, websites, and videos that I'll be presenting here, in order to learn more about how to take care of your family photos. Feel free to pause the video at any point on these following slides to copy the information by writing it down or taking screenshots. Shown here are 3 of the books that are available with information that can be helpful. These are by Maureen Taylor, Denise Levenick, and Jane Long. Maureen Taylor and Denise Levenick also have websites with archived posts from their blogs with lots of good information. You might also check the websites for the American Library Association, Henry Ford Museum, National Archives, the Library of Congress, the Minnesota Historical Society, the Northeast Document Conservation Center, the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center, and the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. All of these sites also have great information. As I mentioned, there are also some YouTube videos, such as some from the Smithsonian Institution archives, including the one that I mentioned earlier on how to remove photos from a sticky or magnetic album. And there's also a video from the State Archives of North Carolina. There are many other books, websites, and YouTube videos that you might wish to consult. But be sure that the sources are reputable and reliable. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope I've been able to provide you with some tips and resources so that you can help protect your family treasures for years to come.